Alright guys, in today's video we're looking at a 2013 Chevrolet Avalanche, and we've got this problem with the ABS light lit, we've got traction off, and we got stability track off. Occasionally you'll also get it saying to service traction flashing up on the top. So we also got this accompanied by a really loud noise coming from the front, so we're going to pull the codes and I'm going to let you listen to the sound of this coming off the tow truck. Alright guys, we've got our Tech 2 clone scan tool hooked up with our Candy module for this 2013 Avalanche. We're going to go into the chassis subsystem. There's no trailer brakes and there's no leveling on this truck. We're going to go into the electronic brake control module and we're going to try and take a look at the diagnostic trouble codes. So we got good communications. We got one code, C0040 right front wheel speed sensor. So misleading code in my opinion, because when I play back this sound of the wheel coming off the trailer, off the tow truck, you can tell it's definitely a wheel bearing problem. So I think what's happened is internally the hub's grenaded and damaged the sensor. Let's go take a look at that clip, and then let's also take a look at the actual wheel. Alright guys, we got up on a jack and a jack stand. Between the code and the sound, we know it's coming from the right side here, front right. Let's get into position here and let's just see how bad this really is. We're just going to do a torsion test here to see how... Yeah, this is the only thing missing from this is this. So it's got to come off here. We're going to have to be real gentle to it too, because we don't want it to separate and grenade inside the steering knuckle. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the cover, get the lug nuts off, and get the wheel off, and we'll take a look and see what it looks like with the wheel out of the way. Alright guys, these lug nuts are 22 millimeter. We're going to be getting this axle nut off with a 36 millimeter, and we're going to be using an impact wrench. After we get that off, we're going to remove the brake caliper and bracket as a complete assembly. We're going to take off the two 18s that are sitting right behind here. And then when we get that done, to get the rotor off, we're going to remove this T30 that's right here. That'll expose the hub for us. So I'm going to just go run through this, and then we'll stop, and I'll tell you what the next steps are after that. We'll leave it sit there for a minute. Stop. Yeah, we might not be able to get enough torque with the swivel. And that's on there. Gonna have to get a breaker bar. All right, now let's try it. keep that guy there for a bit. Now we need to take this rotor off. Sit this right on the tire for the moment. All right. Yep. Let's go ahead and finish this. All right, this guy's held in by 3/15s. We're going to go ahead and pre-lube the threads. We're going to see what kind of access we have. We're going to use a brass drift just to make sure that our shaft isn't binding up, and to see if we can get some more room to get a socket on there. All right. Let's see how we do with this. There's one. There's two. Well, guys, I can't say that I've ever seen this before, but I'm not going to complain. This hub just fell right out. Get this axle out of the way so we can get the last bolt. Actually, you know what? We'll just leave them there. All right, the next thing we got to do is we got to pull this sensor. So let me get something to pull it out of here and release these other clips, and then we'll be able to bring it down. All right, guys, I moved the caliper assembly over onto this box. We're still using the bungee to hold it, but I just don't want any pressure on the hose. And then we're going to take the sensor off here just to make it a little bit easier to get all this stuff apart. It'll also give us a view as to what the sensor looks like, because given it was coating out, it's probably damaged. The new hub will come with one, so it doesn't really matter, but just curious. Oh yeah, he smoked. The sensor's magnetic, and those are all pieces of steel sticking to him. All right, so we'll get this and the backing plate off together. So our backing plate is fine, no damage, everything's good there. We'll give them a cleaning before we put them back on. And then our hub, you can see, I think she was ready to grenade, actually. Yeah, wasn't going to take much before this actually came off. So, super dangerous. We got it just in time, I think. And the owner was right not to try and drive it and have it towed over here to get it worked on. All right, let's get that harness off of here next. So we're going to take a small flathead screwdriver and we're going to release this retaining clip here. All right, so that's out. We're going to take a long nose plier and get this guy out. Just give him a squeeze and pull him through. There we go. All right, so that's out. And then up here, we're going to take a trim tool. Zoom in up here. It's just like pulling a clip right off this little bracket attachment right there. All right, and then we'll release the lever here for the electrical connection. Looks like that might be some kind of a safety lever. Yeah. To work that off first. It's always something, guys. All right, let me get up in here. The camera's in my way to see how we get this little clip. We got all this off. We're getting defeated by a little plastic clip. Let me figure out how we get behind this, and then we'll disconnect this sensor wire, and I'll show you what the new hub looks like. All right, guys, I'm just going to show this part again because looking at the clip, it looks like I might have blocked your view. We just prized this out like we would any kind of a Christmas tree clip using a trim tool like this. And then our little retaining clip here that was defeating us, we just came in here and pulled it back so that we can push it down. So now I think, yeah, now it comes off. A lot of dirt and crud in there. We'll want to clean that out. Anyway, and there's our sensor. Now normally, you know, if you were just replacing the sensor, this would be the piece you were after. But in this case, it's the whole enchilada. Now we're going to need to clean all this up, re-grease these splines, clean off all the interior here. There's an awful lot of what looks like powdered, sintered metal and dried up bearing grease from inside this guy. So a lot of cleaning up to do. I won't show that on here. You guys, you know, can deal with whatever you got there. But let me show you what the replacement part looks like. So it's going to be a GM 8485 6654. Right, so just like always, right? Go OEM or go home. So this guy will come with the whole new sensor harness. So there'll be a new Christmas tree clip in here, so you don't have to worry about damaging it. And looks like there was even one of these I wasn't aware of, so we could have just pulled that one out too instead of disconnecting it, and then we got this guy that pushes in. So she's all ready to go. We just have to get our mating area cleaned up, and this guy's ready to install and take the place of this defective one. Now, do you just replace the one that's bad, or do you replace them both? Well, GM doesn't require replacing both of them, but it does suggest that you might want to. We got to remember that this was installed at the factory back in 2013, and it suddenly died. Who's to say that the other one is not going to follow it very soon, and then you're going to end up with another tow charge? So what I'd like to do is replace these hubs in pairs. So we'll be actually replacing both of these. Same thing I would do in the rear. If something failed in the rear, replace them in pairs. All right, so let's get this cleaned up, and we'll come back for the final torque values on the reassembly. So guys, zooming in here, I thought it'd be helpful to talk about why we saw what we saw as a driver of the vehicle. So once the internals started to disintegrate and began covering the sensor with these particles of steel, it obscured its ability to appropriately and reliably report the wheel speed. That's what led to the ABS light, the DTC code that we pulled on the Tech 2, and the traction and stabilization being turned off, because that's just standard for the EBCM to do if it's not reading correctly from the wheel. And this is why, by the way, the driver also indicated the ABS would randomly activate while they were driving. So that's all because of this. Then what happened is the driver kept driving with the ABS light on, thinking it wasn't that serious. Eventually, this problem internally continued to add up. So you can see down in there the little kind of splines, if you will, that the sensor normally views and then magnetically detects to determine your wheel speed. But underneath that we can't see is the actual bearing. And I think what had happened here is the bearings gave out and then began to have a domino effect. You went from just the ABS light to starting to hear a knocking sound. And then the knocking sound then proceeded to that squealing sound that you saw at the beginning of the clip coming off the tow truck. If this had been ignored any longer, what would have happened is the whole thing would have grenaded, and then it would have separated on you. And that could have led to an accident. All right, guys, we've got this all cleared up, at least as clear as I'm interested in getting it. We've also cleared up around the outside mating surface as well. All I did for this was we came in here with our wire wheel, did around there. And then on the interior side, I took some emery cloth. I got in here and got all the rust along the front edge. Not really concerned about the back edge because that's going to remain exposed and it's just going to re-rust. But we want this front side done. Let's take a quick look at the service manual and see what it has to say about this job, just for comparison to what we did. This is for the 2013 Avalanche, Suburban, Tahoe, Yukon, and Escalade that we're covering here today. 1500 procedure. Basically very simple, guys. It's just like a one-page thing. They don't really say a whole lot about it. Remove the speed sensor. For vehicles with four-wheel drive, they suggest you remove the drive shaft from the wheel bearing and hub assembly. Now, you don't actually have to remove the axle. Just what I showed you is sufficient so that you can separate it. And then put it back together with all three of the bolts that hold it, the 15mm bolts, 133 foot-pounds. And then they just give you a tip to note that the wheel speed sensor, the new bearing comes with a new wheel speed sensor, so you would not reuse the old one. So that's all you get guidance-wise from the service manual. So, that's it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start putting everything back together, and then we'll just take different breaks and go over the torque values. But you've got the 3 torque values for this at 133. So all I'm going to do above and beyond what you saw in the service manual, I'm going to use some of this GM grid wrench grease, 105, it should say 1344 there. It's kind of wore off. And this is just a corrosion preventative. And we're just going to put some on the front splines here. Don't get it on the threads where the axle nut's going to be. And you don't need to go all the way back. It'll get spread back on its own. And then whatever's left on your finger, just a thin film. You don't want to cake it up in here. Just a thin film to do two things. It'll help this go in, and it'll help it come out someday. So we just want to have whatever was on our finger. Should be sufficient. All right. Now we're going to take the hub assembly that we have sitting here in the box. And we're going to go grab our backing plate. I actually forgot to clean this one before we restarted the scene here, so let me just give that a quick shot here. Just trying to get any old grease and debris off of it. Alright, so a little bit more than I thought here, guys. Let me clean this back up and we'll pop back. Alright, I'm happy with that. We can see the witness mark from the triangle. We can use that bolt we left up there to hold it for a moment. And we get our new one into position. All right, we just had to get this little guy cut so we could expose our harness here. And then, whoops, I'm realizing we got this on backwards. Let's see. Nope, like that. These little dimples face outward. Sorry about that. All right, now we'll run this through. And then we'll support the axle from behind. We'll work it on the splines. There we go. And then we'll thread it in by hand. That bolt that we left in at the top there, right? This guy right here. We'll thread him in by hand. And then we'll thread the other two in, and we'll torque all three of them to the 133 foot-pounds that we saw in the service manual. No Loctite or anything like that. GM doesn't require that. You saw in the service manual. It's just a torque. All right, so I'm going to go get those in position, and then we'll come back and we'll do the brake rotor. You should thread in by hand. Might take a little bit at the end, but they should thread in by hand. There we go. One more. This way, this one will go on a lot easier. Give it a little buff with that rust at the end. All right, let's go grab the torque wrench and get these to 133. All right. That's one and two more to go. All right, let's zoom in up here. All right, to get under here, because of the ball joint stud, you got to have a smaller type of socket to fit in here. So just keep in mind you're going to have a couple of different of these 15 millimeters to fit. All right, guys, front brake rotor replacement. We're going to reference that section so we can get the torque on this little guy, the brake rotor screw. That goes to 106 inch-pounds. No thread locker or anything on it. It's hard enough to get out as it is. And back in this section, front brake caliper bracket. What they're going to tell us to do here is remove all traces of the original adhesive from the bolt, clean it with alcohol or equivalent, let it dry, and then apply GM 1234 5493. This is a red thread locker. And then to the threads of the bolt, and then we're going to put that guy, both of those 18s in at 148 foot-pounds. All right, we'll throw a washer on here before we forget about it. And then we'll come over here and give a little fluid film to protect that. And put some on there to protect that. And we're going to line up the threaded hole on the hub. This one's threaded, this one's not. So get the threaded hole and find the hole that you were using for the retaining screw. I think that's it. No, that's it. There's a couple of holes in here. If this is rusted on, you can put some screws in here to push it off, but you want this beveled guy. All right, and now we need to put that guy back in. And we'll get him to the 106 inch-pounds of torque that was specified. If we can go put our bit in. All right, 106. All right, now let's take care of this cable up here. So we know we don't need this guy. So we can go ahead and prise him out. Come on. Okay. And we'll take the new pieces. Put this one in here. We'll put this one in here. Reconnect this. We got to get this little clip to slide back in there. It's always something, guys. It's always something. No, you have to go take a closer look at that one. You always want to be careful you don't break anything. I'm wondering if it has to be pushed in before we connect it. Not familiar with this kind of a safety clip. There it goes. Is that going to let me push it in? No, okay. It's just tight. I'm going to have to prise it back out again. All right. Take two. Push it in. Snap it closed. This little guide pin goes in the back hole. And just push that Christmas tree connector all the way in. And that's done. All right, let's get the caliper back on. So we're going to prep these two bolts with the old adhesive that's on them. All right, we're going to brake clean off the outer side of this rotor before we put this caliper assembly back on. Just after anything that we might have touched and got greased on here. All right. And we're going to make sure that we've got this guy situated where the hose is not crinkled up. And we got these pads going on right. All right. I'm just going to have him stay there for just a second. Come down and deal with these bolts. So it turns out that whatever this yellow stuff is that GM originally used is super tough to get out of these grooves, so I'm not going to be too concerned that we didn't get it all. We're going to put our GM red right along the same area. Come on. Hopefully we'll have enough to finish this job. You don't have to goober a lot on here. As it goes through the threads, it's going to get evenly distributed. Do want to get a little bit more than that, though. We're struggling here to get the last little bit. All right, let's get this first bolt started by hand. All right, don't need that anymore. We'll get the other bolt going, and then I'll come back and torque it up for you. All right, guys, and then both of these 18s to 148. Both top and bottom. All right, guys, so last thing, we've got the caliper back on and torqued down. We've got the hub torqued down. We got the rotor reattached. Now we need to go put this axle nut back on. Now, I'm going to show you in the service manual later, you can't reuse the old one. The torque value on this is pretty high, and so the nut ends up being too metal fatigued. So the service manual is going to tell you not to reuse it. They're going to recommend you don't use the washer either. I put it up here so we wouldn't lose it. So we're going to replace both of these. We're going to replace the washer with a GM 1552 2089. And again, I'll show you after we get done here in the service manual. And we're going to replace the nut with an 1160 9826. You can see inside the new nut, there's a top of Loctite that's attached to it. And I don't know if you can tell this, but you know, these nuts are not perfectly circular, right? It's kind of a prevailing type nut that helps hold it on in the absence of a lock washer. That's why it's very hard to spin on by hand. So this guy, I'm going to snug him down, and then we'll come back and go over the torque value. And then the other thing I'm going to do while I'm in here, we're going to go ahead and fluid film the outside of this guy before we put our wheel back on and put our lug nuts back on. So let me go get the take you to the service manual, show you what the torque value is on this while I snug this up. All right, last section, wheel drive shaft replacement section. After we go through all this, the key things to note are you cannot reuse the nut. You have to have a brand new nut. When you torque these things down, they get metal fatigue, so it's not safe to reuse them. So we're going to discard our old nut and washer from the hub that we already did. And then what we're going to do is we're going to come over here. We're going to install the new nut and washer. And we're going to torque it down to 177 foot-pounds. All right, guys, ready to torque this up to 177 foot-pounds. The service manual, suggests using a drift or something like this in one of the vanes of the rotor. So that's what we're going to do. And we let the other side down because we no longer need to turn it. Right now we need it to stay put so we can get this very high level of torque. $177. All right. Put a little bit more fluid film on the front there, and then we'll get our wheel back on, and we'll get these 22 millimeter lug nuts torqued down to 140 foot-pounds. All right, guys, one last thing we need to go do. We're going to go in here and clear the old codes out. You remember we had this speed sensor code here, so we're going to clear that out. You see our ABS lights out now on the dash. And our traction and StabiliTrak are no longer off, they're on. And actually it just flashed, but you guys have to trust me with that, and we've got no codes. So at this point, we're going to take it for a test drive, but I'm confident that we've fixed this problem. Interesting type of situation. I hope you guys found it interesting. I hope you learned something, and I hope it gave you some information with torque values and part numbers if you run into something similar on your 2007 to 2014 new body style type SUV. Avalanche is what we did here today, 2013, but this would apply to the Suburban, the Escalade, and the Tahoe as well, all the ones that were on that service manual cover. If you got questions or comments, leave them below and I'll try to help. If you found this useful and it saved you some money, pay it forward and hit that like button. I'd really appreciate it. And as always, thanks for watching.